First, I want to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Will Rogers. I'm the content expert for the UL system for teaching, online teaching and learning, or online learning and teaching. I switch it up all the time. I am also glad to have three experts on ungrading joining us today. I want to thank all the attendees, both here and who will, I guess, view the recording later on. Thank you for your time. What we're going to do is have short introductions / definitions, little talks from our three panelists. And then after that, what we'll do is I'll ask some questions. I'll try and tie it together. Knowing my three panelists, I will have the easiest job in the world today because I think they're all going to tie in really well together. So let me avoid the professor problem and try and not talk too much. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce everyone straight across the board and then let them go in the order that we've decided on. So our first speaker will be Professor Meredith King at University of New Orleans. Then we'll have Dr. Elizabeth Hornsby at Southeastern. And finally, Professor Meredith McKinnie from ULM. I'm also at ULM. So Meredith is next door to me in the office, so I'm having this in stereo. So without further ado, Professor King, if you'd like to go first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith. So like Will said, I work at UNO. I'm actually the assistant director at the Center for Teaching Innovation here. And then I also adjunct at Nichols. So I am just all over the UL system, rocking it all over the place. And I figured I would do a little PowerPoint and talk to y'all just some about the basics of ungrading, just to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page, as well as talk a little bit about what I'm doing and how I use ungrading. Just, again, to give a little foundation. We can't help that, right? Got to make sure everyone has a little bit of the same basis. So hopefully you're all seeing my PowerPoint right now. And again, it's just going to go real quick. It's just a simple little thing. So obviously we're talking about ungrading. So I have a bunch of quotes from, oh man, of course, always. A bunch of quotes from this guy, Jesse Stommel. He's one of the big names in ungrading. And I do have at the end of this a bibliography that hopefully we'll be able to get to y'all with a whole list of works for you to consult. But I have a few things from him just to start off. The word ungrading, an active present participle, suggests that we need to do intentional critical work to dismantle traditional and standardized approaches to assessment. So what I really love about this quote personally, I like that he points out that there is work to be done, that there is active work to be done with ungrading. I think lots of times people, when they first hear about the concept, think that you are sort of becoming hands-off in a way, that you're letting things go. And one of the things that I tend to think about is the work that you are putting into it. And it is this work of sort of dismantling that we are doing and rethinking and restructuring as we are doing ungrading. So I really love that particular definition. So the next thing that we think about when we're thinking about ungrading, or at least I think about, is why do we grade at all, right? And y'all can put some answers in the chat if you have them, if you want to. I have some basic ideas as to why I think we grade. And I can wait a second to see if y'all want to put anything in the chat. But, if you don't have answers, I'm not going to give it a full teacher pause because I know we've got three of us and a lot to discuss. The main reason that or some of the main reasons that we grade, right, we're trying to come up with something to assess our students, to basically say whether it is that they are learning or not learning, right? And like essentially we're trying to come up with some sort of scale to figure out, where is this student, how do I assess them, and what does this mean? And that can be on a small scale just within our class, or it can be something that is on a larger scale in our university, on something like a big national exam for some sort of accreditation, right? We're grading in order to compare. Someone's put compare in the chat. Absolutely, you want data on how the student is doing to figure out relative to themselves and relative to others how it is that they're doing, whether it is that they're learning. And that's just sort of on a very basic level, what it is that we're doing when we're grading. But there's some problems with grades as they have sort of developed, even if maybe the intent of grades in the beginning was good, and I have not done research on that, so I cannot speak to that. As we sort of grade currently in the current system, we have a lot of problems that come up. So lots of times grades can incentivize product rather than process. You know, if you are someone who can knock something out and maybe you've missed some steps along the way and you can still get an A, that's getting valued as good work, as good learning, even though it's the product of the thing and not the process of learning. It can create competition rather than collaboration. I like that Jeffrey in the chat pointed out comparative data. We mean that oftentimes is a good thing, but lots of times that does create competition among students and can stifle where they are and make them not want to work together, make them not want to share, and make them not part of that learning environment together. Lots of times it doesn't give valuable feedback. Again, that depends on how you grade and what you're doing. But if you're just giving letter grades or even sometimes number grades, that doesn't necessarily mean anything to the student. What is a 74 versus a 76? What is a C plus versus a B minus, right? Like where do we even make that distinction, which leads us into that they do not have consistent meaning. My 74 could be very, very different from another professor who's teaching the same course as me is 74, right? We could have a different idea. And while we can attempt to calibrate and make sure that we're all sort of on the same page, it's difficult for those to have consistent meaning across the board for student. Lots of times, again, it doesn't accurately assess learning. We can go to that incentivizing product idea, that looking at a specific number or letter as the thing rather than the actual accumulation of knowledge as the thing. It can lower interest in learning, again, if people are working for a grade and not knowledge, and it can encourage cheating. People are worried about their grade. I hear this all the time, even in classes that I have that are ungraded. I'm worried I'm not going to get an A. I'm worried I'm not going to pass. I'm worried grade, grade, grade. And students get so caught up in that they turn to things like, I'm sure we've all dealt with things like Course Hero and Chegg and things like that, right? That they turn to try to get the grade because they're concerned, because that's what matters. That's what's going to ultimately show them whether they have succeeded or not succeeded in the course, not whether they've learned something. So those are just some issues that we have with grades. So Jesse Stommel says that ungrading starts with two ideas, and they're both pretty simple. And I like to keep these in mind as I am thinking about my own courses, and I go back to them over and over again when I'm sort of having difficulties. The first one is trust students. We have to put our trust in them. We're asking them to trust us. We have to put our trust in them. And the second one that I go to all the time is that fairness is not a good excuse for a lack of compassion. And I think about this constantly. When we're looking at grades, oftentimes we say that we want to be fair, right? It's not fair to one student to make a C and this other student to make a B. If their work is not, the same, we want to rank them, we want to compare them, we want it to be fair, as if there is an equality that can be achieved, and it really puts a focus on equality and not equity. Right? It means that we're not looking at the whole student, we're not looking at the situation, and we're not looking again at that progress, at what that student has done. So if I come in with a student, if I have a student who is always going to make an A in my class, if I'm teaching currently this semester at Nichols, I'm teaching an online asynchronous English 102. And if I come in with a student who's a good writer, objectively, probably could have tested out of this class and for whatever reason didn't, they were always going to make an A. I was always going to look at their writing and say like, oh, this is good writing. And I don't understand how it ultimately, right, if we're looking at fairness, saying, oh, their writing is better than this other student, that gives us our comparison, versus looking at this as, okay, this student was always a good writer. What is the learning that has happened for this other student? What are the factors that have gone into this other student's work this semester? Maybe my student who would always get an A has done basically nothing. right? It's easy for them. And I have another student who is struggling and has shown me progress. How is that fair? What is our idea of fairness in there? So I come back to that a lot, a lot, a lot as I'm working through this. Here's just a big old list of types of ungrading. I know one of the things also that I get a lot when people are first learning about ungrading or thinking about ungrading, people are like, okay, does that mean that I just literally don't have any grades? I have to turn in grades to the university. I have to turn in midterms. I have to turn in final grades. How does that work? What can I do? And again, in our resources, we have a ton of information that you can look at as to how other people have do that. We're going to talk about some that like things that we have done. But here you can sort of look through some of the things that you can do. One of the things that you can do when you're first getting into this is having grade-free zones, right? So you can have one part of the semester as ungraded or only major assignments as ungraded. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. Even if you're doing little things like self-assessments, right, then you're working towards this idea of ungrading. The same thing with sort of process letters, where you're asking them to explain what they're doing. Minimal grading, where rather than giving a whole variety of numbers, maybe you give a very small scale of numbers and you're very clear about what those mean, right? You're on a 1 through 5 rather than a 1 through 100. And you have very clear ideas as to what those mean. Or you have work that's assigned but not collected, work that they're doing for themselves, and you trust them to tell you that they're doing it. Doing authentic assessments. I know that that is like a big phrase that has been going around a lot. Authentic assessments, community service or community or service-based presentations and learning. Give them sort of reasons beyond points and grades that can lead again to this idea of actually assessing what learning is. You can do contract grading. It outline exactly what's required for each letter grade. You can say if you turn in 3 out of 5 of the major assignments, that's a C. And that's fine if that's what you're going for. You can have them sign a contract at the beginning. I'm going for a C. I'm going to turn a 3 out of 5 of the major assignments. Fantastic, wonderful. That's what you're getting. So you can look at things like that. You can have them do portfolios. Lots of y'all probably already do portfolios. Lots of you probably already do a bunch of this stuff and don't realize how easily adapted to ungrading it is. That is I swear to you, it's a true statement. So much of this is just very, very easily adapted. You can do peer assessment that again can include process letters if you're worried about peer assessment, you know, not always going exactly the way that you want it to, and peers not always being equal in their assessment. Again, go back to that idea of what is fairness versus equity, and you can include process in that. And you can have their students create rubrics again, rather than just getting rid of grades. You can say, okay, what is it that you would be looking for here? You create the expectation based on this whole unit that we've gone through, and we'll go through that together, and we'll come up with as a course, as a class, as a community, as a class community, what it is that we're looking for together as we go through this. And then here are resources. Again, we're going to get these somewhere where you can actually have them. I know on the PowerPoint, they're not that much. I will thank Meredith McKinnie for putting together the majority of this. Absolute rock star in putting together these resources. I literally have 2 slides worth. If you are looking for an easy place to start, I would definitely highlight Jesse Stommel's website. It's super, super easy to go through, and he's got some really good stuff there. A basic bibliography and ungrading and FAQ, really simple to go through. And if you are more of a book person, an easy place to start is Ungrading Why Rating Students Undermines Learning. It came out in 2020. Susan Bloom is the editor, and it is full of not only really good studies of what people have been doing, but also some rubrics that they've made, some self-assessments that they've given students. So there's a lot of practical work in there that you can use to then adjust for yourself. And that's it in terms of the quick overview PowerPoint for 2 more seconds, because I know I'm not trying to take up all the time. But just for 2 more seconds to talk a little bit about what I do. So I got into this because I come from a liberal arts background, like that's my background. And where I went to school, we did not have grades. everything was assessments. We wrote, and got tons and tons of feedback. And it never made sense to me when I would have friends at other universities telling me like, oh yeah, I was up all night studying just so I could, get this grade to pass this course. I was like, okay, but what did you learn from it? Like, what did your professor tell you? Like, what have you gained from it? And I know part of that is just I don't know, the fatal flaw of academics to be like, but what did you learn from a thing, even when you're like a 19-year-old to your other 19-year-old friends? But a lot of that was me just believing in this sort of idea that there can be something else. And so I've always sort of been looking for ways to bring that small liberal arts field to larger public universities. I don't think it's fair that students at larger public universities don't get that same experience, that it's something that is privileged for people who can attend private small liberal arts. That is, again, if we're using the word fairness, that's not fair. That's not equitable in any sort of a way. And so I was always trying to find that. I stumbled across this idea of ungrading, and actually talked to Meredith McKinnie. She talked to me about doing it when I was first doing it. So again, big thank you to her. I'm so glad to be sharing this space with her today. And sort of came up with a class that requires a lot of self-reflection. I make my students reflect all the time. And the way that I run my class, it's an asynchronous online Rhet and Comp class, where I'm dealing with a lot of freshmen who have, really haven't been in college. This is their first English class. It's their first online class. It's asynchronous. And I tell them all the time, I let them essentially rewrite everything until it is at a place where I find it satisfactory for them. And then I ask them what grade they think they should get. And I have a few questions that go along with that, essentially like what percentage of the work have you been doing on some scales. But I ask them to reflect. And what I have found time and time again is that they, if anything, put their grade lower than what I would. I tell them if they think they're doing A work, unless there's something that hasn't come in as satisfactory where they haven't shown that progress, okay, have an A. I don't care what the letter grade is, have an A. And the number of them who give themselves A's is just tiny in comparison to the number who could have it. Who are doing the work, who are showing me progress. So that's sort of how I have adapted this format, is to really allow them to work over and over again to reach a point where they feel satisfied and where I can see their progress. That's really what I am looking for in those moments. So that's sort of how I have done this. And I'm sure that we'll, talk a little bit more about specifics, but I do want to pass it on to the next person and not take up all the time in the world. So I will pass it over, and I believe Dr. Hornsby is next. I'll just pass it over to her.
That's me. And I'm just gonna I'm Dr. Elizabeth Hornsby. I teach at Southeastern. I cut my teeth teaching 5 sections of public speaking. And I think that's where I sort of developed an orientation towards ungrading, because a lot of time grading speeches felt extremely subjective. And I was grappling with the students that were getting A's versus the students that were getting C's. And I really was returning to that question of like, why am I grading? How is this fair, equitable, all those questions. Fast forward to now, I am the graduate program coordinator for our Masters of Arts in Strategic Communication. So I primarily teach 100% online asynchronous to adult learners, which is a big jump from teaching a general education course with, students across the undergraduate spectrum, larger classes, to now smaller classes, adult learners, students who haven't been in school for a while. Our program is very applied, so they're not necessarily writing theses, but they're doing these very comprehensive projects. And so I was asked a couple summers ago to teach a 4-week, 100% online asynchronous ethics class at the graduate level. So I was like, okay, let me try this ungrading thing here, because I had started my sort of investigation when I was teaching the public speaking classes, but I had never found a class that I felt was safe enough for both me as the professor and also for the students to kind of explore this. So an ethics class felt like a really good fit, because we're already talking about sort of this moral overlay and having them sort of evaluate themselves. And so the way the class was set up, they still had the same assignments I would have in a graded section. except for at our sort of designated academic checkpoints that we have for our institution, they would do self-evaluation. So at this point, I had a list of questions similar to Meredith, like, how do you think you're doing? What do you think you've done? So I want you to be extremely self-reflexive about your own learning process. And then at the end of it, how would you assess yourself? And I gave them sort of not criteria like I wrote 30 pages or, you know, had 300-word discussion, but sort of this is what A or superior work would look like. And it was much more about labor and engagement. How engaged were you with the material? You know, how invested were you in trying to understand? How challenged were you? Did you find this difficult? And so I tried to rework this idea of assessment from being punitive to being reflexively learning, right? Looking at what I've done and trying to assess how far have I come from the start of this when I looked at the syllabus and didn't really understand to this point, to this point, to this point. And I wanted them at the very end of this to have a journey, almost for it to be a journey of I started the class at this point and I ended at this point, and therefore I'm assessing myself in this way. And so it was it was tough for them because they're used to being told what to do. They're used to getting a 30-page rubric that is extremely detailed, that they have to have very little thought in kind of going through the class. It's just work to the rubric and I will get X grade, instead of really trying to engage with the material in a way that is intrinsically motivating and not extrinsically motivating, which is a different way of learning. And so I've taken pieces of that, you know, that it was a writing class. So I was like, okay, well, I teach a quantitative measurement class, which is code, which is data analysis. How does that work when you're dealing with numbers? Well, the first thing I know is that those students come in because communication majors go into communication to not deal with numbers. And here they are at the graduate level having a whole class on quantitative measurement. So there already is a level of apprehension around numeracy to begin with. So I looked at that class and said, where can I take the fear of failure away? Do I have to grade the assignments for accuracy, or can I have them turn them in and give them feedback and let them continually revise it until at the very end they submit something where they've not only learned, but they've also been able to fail and try again and fail and try again. And so for me, as I'm an assistant professor, you know, and that comes with its own series of evaluations. A big question I get is, well, how do you do this when you have tenure and promotion guidelines and all these sort of other things that kind of mandate how assessment should work? And what I say about anything, whether it's about ungrading, whether it's about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I always say the strongest form of protection you have in sort of being innovative in any space is going to your own institution's mission statement and aligning what you're doing to that. So I went to my institutional website and said, okay, what are our core values? Our core values are excellence and caring. And in that excellence piece, it said continually striving for the highest level of achievement. Okay, overcoming challenges with reflection, improvement, innovation, and reinvention. I was like, got it. That's the only justification I need to reformat my assessment in this way, because I'm having them reflect constantly. I'm having them improve. I implore a revise and resubmit sort of format, like your first try is not fatal. I'll give you multiple chances to get it right, should you choose to do that extra work. Innovation, I allow them to be creative. They co-create their rubrics. They're allowed to pitch me a different project, but they also have to sort of think about how that project will be assessed within the overall outcomes of the course. And then reinvention. How can we sort of reinvent or rethink about assessment and measurement, which is key in our discipline, but also in academia as a whole? As graduate students, how can we think about this in a different way than the way we've been taught in our experiences? Because for me, a lot of the stories that I hear for students, grades have been the thing that have penalized them, that have punished them, that have marginalized them. And that cuts across race, gender, and class, right? If I don't have this background or I don't come into this class with this experience, there's an expectation that I'm going to fail. And that frustrates me. And I feel like I don't have a lot of power in this institutional system, but what I can do is take some of that away. and allow you to say, okay, yeah, you may not come in at the same learning knowledge and the same level as the person next to you, but you know what? We can all get to the end goal, which is the same. And so for me, ungrading does the deeper work of equity that Meredith was talking about. It starts to dismantle systems of education that were never intended for the types of learners that are sitting in our class. And we just have to be honest about that. And it allows people to actually succeed. I was joking with someone, I said, it really is no child left behind, right? It really, when you start to pull back these frameworks and systems that, if we're honest, have been measures of exclusion and not inclusion, we start to see different people succeed. We start to see success stories that look a little bit different than the success stories. And a student becomes a diversified student body and not a monolith. And our students are not a monolith. Our classrooms cannot be a monolith. And so we have to think about grading in ways that expand and not restrict. I'm going to stop and let Meredith talk because I could preach for all day long, but we'll let her go.
Thank you. I'm Meredith McKinnie. I'm also a little all over the UL system. I have taught at ULM since 2006. I am an ABD PhD student at UL Lafayette. And so I've been teaching comp since the very beginning. And I have come to find out that the students that I teach now are not the students I taught in 2006. The students I taught in 2006 were a lot more like me with my background, and that is not the case today. So I have learned, I'm in the learner seat now, right? So I'm going to tell y'all, like I tell my students on the first day, you know, writing is a practice, okay? Just like running, training for a marathon, if you don't get out there and run, you're not going to get faster. You're not going to get better. You're not going to improve your stamina. You have to do writing to get better at writing. And then I thought about, you know, when I used to ask students, how many of you have a job outside of this? I may get 2. Out of a 25-person class, 23 are going to work 30 to 35 hours a week. So how can I make this more fair for them? So I decided we're going to write in class. Most of the writing is done in class. They have longer due dates. A lot of times it's not due till the next night at midnight. But they do most of their writing when I'm present. They can ask me questions, which on my end has the benefit of I get less emails with questions, right? And students use me as they need me. I have a very relaxed writing environment. Students are able to come and go. They're able to check Instagram if they want to for 5 minutes to zone out. I have that open door policy, and it works really well. It takes the pressure off the learning environment. I tell students that you are not in competition with anybody else. Wherever you start your race, I'm looking for you to move your needle, right? I just want you to move forward. I can't pretend this student had the same learning background as that student. They have gotten further and further apart. So what I wanted to do, I tell students I want them to increase their writing awareness. So writing is a practice that you are going to continue to do, and you're going to continue to improve the more you do it. So the first thing you need to do is become aware of yourself as a writer, get to know yourself as a writer. So they're moving their own needle, they're raising writing awareness. I want to be their writing partner, right? I want to lessen my authority in the classroom. I want to encourage them to take risk. I want to encourage them to be creative, and they can't do that if they're worried about a grade. So essentially what I did is I jettisoned all letters and numbers. Instead of focusing on rigor and punishment, I am focusing on reward and connection and building relationships. They talk to me in writing, and I talk back to them in writing. I noticed I was getting frustrated with reading student work with the evaluative mindset. I would get to the end of the first paragraph and I'm already thinking C, D, B, right? I wasn't enjoying, I wasn't engaging the writing. And now I read their work and I just talk back to them, right? I make suggestions, I ask them questions, I make them dig more into their own work. So how I kind of took a combo of labor-based grading contracts and ungrading. I don't like the term contract. It sounds like law school. I don't like how cumbersome it can be to build a contract with students, but I do like the labor-based part, right? As long as you do the work, right, you'll get the grade. So essentially my students will have 1 to 2 writing components per week and 1 essay every 4 weeks. So on those daily assignments, you get a satisfactory or unsatisfactory. Did you do it to standard? And on the papers, you just keep redrafting until you do it to standard. And because we do so much in-class writing, I've seen their work, I know their work. We have had so much feedback, peer review feedback. I don't have many students that have to rewrite, right? Most of them get satisfactory on the first time because it's essentially their 3rd draft. I respond to narrative with narrative. We do a lot of pre-writing in class. I hear all these talks about rigor, which a lot of times when I hear rigor, it sounds like busy work to me, which I abhor. And so I feel like sometimes we sacrifice connection for rigor, and grades kind of got in the way. I feel like, why bring in math to an English classroom that focuses on words? That makes no sense whatsoever. So they write in class, I respond in class, I respond in the comments section. We do intense feedback on their rough drafts, but essentially, you know, if you do all the work, you get the grade. The only time you lose points is for those daily assignments if you just don't do them, if you don't complete them. And most people end up completing them. And with those final papers, what I do in comp is, if you got a satisfactory, you write me a feedback letter. So on that final draft, instead of giving you feedback, I'm going to ask you about 7 to 8 questions, and you're going to write me a letter and you're going to assess yourself. Because if I give you a list of all the things that I think you did wrong and who made me in charge of writing, right? You're not going to remember it. It's going to hit your ego, high or low, and you're going to leave and you're never going to think about it again. But if I ask you questions and I prompt you to assess yourself, I am building your writing awareness. I am engaging you in the process. I am forcing you to run another mile and forcing you to see the value in it, right? I am trying to level that playing field between teacher and student. And I feel like when you get rid of letters and you get rid of numbers, the connection with the student just really, really increases. What I've seen, the benefits, student agency has increased. They feel more relaxed. It's really decentered my authority. I'm kind of taking a back seat. I'm learning as much from them as they are from me. I've also adapted mine to a junior level advanced grammar course, which took some work because that's kind of an exact, you either know what an adjective is or you don't. But I've used that same approach. They typically, if they don't do well on the test, we test them again, because the point is for them to get it, right? Not to get a D to show they didn't get it well enough, right? I've also adapted this to literature courses as well. Okay, I think that's my time.
Okay, so we're definitely going to have some ways to connect you, and then I want to encourage the attendees, I guess, to put questions in the chat. We already have one from Dr. Rodriguez, which we'll handle in a minute. And so I guess I just want to start out with, how do you, so we've heard a lot about ungrading, and I think we've heard 3 different versions, right? So I guess, what do you all think you do differently from one another? What do you do in common? And what do you think you don't do that maybe someone not in a literature class or not in a communication class could do, right? So that would be my opening connection.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, no, it's but you know, so we've heard 3 different narratives, 3 different versions of ungrading. I think you all, I think there's a big Venn diagram, having talked to the 3 of you before about this, but I also think you do some different things, right? And so what do you think you do differently from one another, right? And you know, like what counts as ungrading that you don't do that might be useful outside of the humanities or maybe outside the non-math? I heard you mention math, Meredith. I rather enjoy math. So I guess that would be my opening question.
So one of the things that I think that we sort of do differently just sort of comes from the modes and levels that we're teaching, right? So I'm teaching freshmen online asynchronous. And so everything that Meredith talks about writing in class and having that advantage of being right there, I don't get that advantage. I've had to try to figure out ways to, I don't want to say manufacture, but I do feel like having that connection and being able to feel like, at least in this particular case, I constantly tell my students writing is rewriting, but you can't really get to rewriting without input or without feedback. And as much as I can sort of give it to them and constantly do through, we use Moodle in this case, right, through our LMS, there is something about, you know, being able to be in the same space-time. I tend to use that because even if it were over Zoom or something like that, you're in the same sort of space-time that allows a certain level of interaction and confidence from your students. So when I listen to Meredith talk about how most of her students, when they get to big assignments, are sort of at satisfactory level and don't have to rewrite, that's not the experience that I have. Most of my students do have to rewrite, and I love that I'm giving them the space to be able to do that in a situation where they can't necessarily go up and just ask the professor, where there is a big barrier of entry to emailing a professor. As much as we'd like to think that, you know, we're always like, email me if you have questions, I'm here. Students find that so intimidating. And this is a way, the fact that I have to give them feedback and they have to redo it is a way for them to be forced to interact with me on this level that a bunch of students would sort of fade lots of times, right? They would just sort of go like, oh, this is the grade I have. So I hear that, and that's so different from what I'm capable of doing just based on the fact that I'm not in person. And I hear Elizabeth talk about being able to do this on graduate level and having them, you know, create their own rubric and all of these things that I would really love to be able to do. But I feel like lots of times, and, you know, maybe this is just my own perception, maybe I should just try it, which is some of this, just like trying it and seeing for a semester and seeing if it works. But it's hard with freshmen where lots of times this is their first English class or maybe second English class, where they just don't know how to put something like that together. And again, being online, sort of the amount of time and space that I have to get them to that point, the way that I have at least worked it out when I'm looking at it, would take so long. I would love to engage them on something like that. I would love to have them be more present in that way. But at least at the beginning of the semester, I haven't figured out a way to be able to do that sort of right off the bat and to get them involved. So when I hear those things, they're all things that I'm like, oh, I'd love to be able to do that. I listen to the two of them and I'm just like, oh, I want to like take notes, want to do that. But I think there's just sort of inherent differences based on those factors.
I think something that the commonality is that everyone is really focused on the student and where the student is at when we first meet. That experience of them coming into our classroom is the defining moment, not necessarily pre-existing issues or pre-existing expectations on our end as the professor, or they're even their own pre-existing expectations of how this class is going to go. Really sort of wading through all of that to get to where are you really at, which all this reflection kind of forces you to do, and not to take a superficial sort of hit at it, but to really say no and be honest with yourself as a student and to be honest with yourself as the professor. Like, everyone's not starting at the same place. Like, as much as you can try to force that to happen, and a lot of times I think grades is sort of the default mechanism to do that, really saying, where is the student at? Where would I like the student to be at the end? And how can I make sure I've done everything that I can within my capacity? Because we talked in our other conversation about boundaries and time and all that, but what do I have the capacity to do to help the student get there? That again is more of an intrinsic motivation and less of a extrinsic sort of punitive situation. I think all of us have that same basis of we want the student to do the best work that they can do. And that might not be what I traditionally think of as the best work, but I'm gonna like maybe awkwardly and uncomfortably push that feeling aside to focus on the student as an individual with experiences that may be new to all of us in how to get from point A to point B, and not sort of disregard that for the way that it's always been, or preconceived ideas of what is progress and what is retention and what is learning. It's sort of refocusing all that back to the student, which is the reason why we have a classroom anyway. So I think that is definitely a commonality that I hear across all of us. That is a really important thing when you are doing this sort of work, is remembering why you're doing it, because you want every student that comes in to be successful, not just the ones that hit on the bell curve.
Yeah, some of the differences I heard, so they do the conferences at the, did y'all both do the conferences? I can't remember. I know you did, Meredith. Yeah. So I have, it depends on what you don't submit, right? So because you grade until it's too satisfactory, or you keep doing it till it's too satisfactory, some students do more work than others, but they need more practice than others. As long as you do the work, you get the grade at the end. I feel like it's a fair assessment in a course that's required for students, especially a course that some students are able to clap out of, don't have to take, didn't have to pay for. It seems fair to me that if they do the work, they get the grade.
So I want to start tying together what the three of you were saying, but also like bring in some of the questions so far from the chat. And one of the things that I think you all three mentioned, and this attendee heard, Dr. Rodriguez, is why is rigor such a negative concept for y'all associated with punishment? Can you talk about why you view rigor that way, and maybe how you, I know the way the three of you teach, and I would say that you all have a certain kind of rigor to how you teach. So can you maybe talk about how you're really understanding rigor in a different way because of ungrading?
Meredith, you want to go? You keep unmuting and unmuting. I don't know if you want to go. I mean, I'll go first. I mean, I have a complicated relationship with rigor because oftentimes as a faculty member, rigor is used in conversations of grade inflation and the class is too easy. It's not rigorous enough. So I don't understand that on a very basic level, because why would I not want every student that comes in my class to be successful? Why would I not be inherently working towards that goal? So if that's my goal and I am a professional in my discipline hired to do this job, why would I not want 100% completion rate or 90% complete? Why would I not want lots of A's? Like, if that is my job. So I think for me, I have to reimagine that word rigor, because for me, it's been almost used punitively against me when I see so many successful students in terms of A's and B's. It's like, oh, your class must be easy. It's not rigorous. Now, I'm trying to reclaim that word, because the beautiful thing about words is that they can mean different things to different people, right? So when I talk to my students about rigor, I talk to them about not just, again, I keep going to this internal, external thing, not just extrinsically motivated rigor, like, oh, I have to do this work to get this grade, but intrinsically motivated rigor, like, I really want to learn this. And that may mean more work. Like Meredith said, you may have to revise some more. You may have to resubmit. You may have to reach out for assistance. You may have to collaborate with your peers. You may have to read a little bit more because you don't understand. But that motivation to do that is not coming necessarily because of a grade penalty. That's coming because I truly want to understand this, because I see the value in it intrinsically for me. Take the professor, take Elizabeth out of it, take the class out of it. I want to know this. And that's the kind of learning that I want to inspire in my classroom. And that to me is a lot more rigorous in the way that we traditionally understand rigor, because of the way that the labor is deployed, right? The labor is deployed, when we think about rigorous for faculty, the labor is deployed through the faculty. The class is rigorous because the faculty member makes it hard, and it is rigorous. Versus the class is rigorous because the student's investment in that class sometimes exceeds the investment of the actual professor. And that is a win when the student is going above and beyond. And that may be, their above and beyond might be a C, let's be honest. Their above and beyond might be a D. But when they were at the bottom of the learning scale, and now that they have worked really hard to get to the middle, I have a hard time as justifying that as not rigorous, because I give them the grade that I feel like their labor deserves. And that's a respect thing. And, you know, I have a complicated relationship with rigor because of thinking about students as producers in society and what they are producing and labeling it as rigorous and not rigorous. Not to mention the inherent disparities of who gets labeled as a rigorous student, what gets labeled as rigor versus what gets labeled as not. We have to sort of think about those things as we're applying those labels. So that's my experience with it. I am, as you can see, I'm still working on that reframing of that word. I'm not quite there yet. It does something in me just because I've seen the negative effects and the consequences of students internalizing what they feel like they could not meet the standards of rigor when that in fact wasn't actually the case. It wasn't that they couldn't do the work, that it was that the way that the work was set up, only certain people were ever going to be able to do the work. And in some cases that was predetermined. And so it didn't matter if they worked as hard as they could, they would never be able to excel in the level of rigor that was assigned to that course. So how can we change that and give the student, as Meredith said, more agency and more autonomy in this situation to be able to take responsibility for how they participate in a rigorous classroom?
I want to just quickly piggyback. Sorry, I know Meredith, you keep on muting also, and I'm like trying to, but just before it left my head, I have just this very perfect example that piggybacks exactly on what you were just saying, Elizabeth. I have a student who is on their 4th rewrite of an assignment that was due in mid-September, right? And they're on their 4th rewrite of it. And I had a conference with a student because I was like, hey, something is getting lost. Let's sit down. Somehow you're not understanding the parameters, or you're losing something, or like something is getting lost in this. So let's have a conversation, which I was able to understand and know, again, because they are able to rewrite. And so it wasn't just a one-time pass where I went like, this isn't good, D, or whatever I would have given it on the first try. I can see improvement, but there's just something that isn't clicking. And we had a conversation, and I told this student after our conversation, I'm not even going to make you rewrite this again. Right? Like I can see through our conversation that you've understood what is going on. We've talked about it. Like that is just as good to me. I see that you have the learning. Like I'm happy to, not have you do this. And he literally stopped me and said, well, can I rewrite it again? I want to get this. I want to be able to do this. And I was like, I mean, of course you can rewrite it again. I'm happy for you to do it. I didn't want to make you do the extra work. I wanted to let you know I saw that you got it. But he wanted to do it. He wanted to go above and beyond. And if that isn't rigor, I don't know what is. I think that we just get lost in this idea of the system that weeds out students, right? And so many times we use rigor as this excuse for an old model of education that doesn't really fit, and that sort of is in opposition to the other message that we get all the time, right? We get, be rigorous, but keep up your retention rates. And the way that universities tend to mean those things are literally in opposition. Make sure that all your students stay and are passing, but also your classes aren't hard enough and all your students are passing. There's literally no way to do both of those things in a traditional system. But if you are putting that agency on the students, and like Elizabeth said, you're the one who's making them responsible for their own rigor, not all of them are going to do it. Not every student would have said, I want to rewrite that again, right? Lots of students would have been like, oh, it's cool, great. And that would have been the end of it, which would have been fine in that situation as well. I want to be clear, but like, that idea that students are being able to create their own meaning in this and see themselves in their own education. I can't think of something else that fits in with those two directives that we're constantly getting. I can't think of another way to marry those two things and get the students engaged and keep retention up while also making sure that they are learning the things that they need to learn for us to give them that check mark that they have done the program. So when I think of rigor, again, it's not necessarily punishment. It's just sort of a word that has been twisted to mean these other goals in a way that is maybe not how we mean them as the professors.
Yeah, Meredith, when I think of rigor, you were talking about weeding out. I kept thinking of like sifting out the students who don't belong here. And I meet those students all the time. They don't think they deserve to be here. They have not been told they are smart. They are shocked when I give them compliments about their writing. So I associate rigor with those people that are hard for hard's sake, which I teach in the humanities. That's antithetical to exactly what I'm doing. Like, I'm trying to teach them compassion and empathy and all of those qualities that make us function as a society. And to be hard for hard's sake, to wheedle out the people that don't belong here. And forgive me if that's that people can have different definitions of rigor, but the people that I hear pounding rigor, that's the kind of behavior that I see. And I want to create a wider space for these people. I want them to bring everybody they know into this space, because I can teach and work with anyone. I will meet them where they are and we will walk along together. And I think that's what all of us should be doing.
So thank you for that. We have time for one more question where the three of you can handle it. And Dr. Broadway has mentioned this. Procrastination, how does it affect y'all's notion of ungrading and how you work in the classroom? So if it does.
I'll go. Not at all. In fact, I probably have less issues with procrastination now than before, when I hammered down these hard penalties of half points off, right? I'm able to form a human connection with these students. I am able to say, the reason your papers are due on Friday is because I grade on Saturday afternoon. And on Sundays, I take my little girls for a walk. And so if you need an extension, you feel free to ask me for that extension and I will give it to you. But if you can, I would appreciate you respect my deadline, because you respect my life outside of this institution as I have respected yours. I've maybe had 3 requests all semester for an extension. I don't have procrastination because I connect with these students. They respect me because they know I respect them. I don't have it.
I sort of incentivize feedback. I talked to the group about this earlier. You know, my thing is if you get something in by the deadline that I have, which are negotiable, because again, I'm dealing with adults with mortgages and responsibilities. But I incentivize. So if you get something in by the deadline, you're going to get the most robust, comprehensive feedback that I can give you. You come in 7 days later, you're going to get what I have the capacity to give you in terms of feedback. You come in at 14 days, you're going to get the capacity that I can give you, because just like I'm allowing you the flexibility of turning things in, you also, that needs to be reciprocal in terms of boundaries. I'm respecting that you have set up your time and space this way. I need you to respect mine. So the expectation cannot be that I can deliver what I have allotted time for in terms of people hitting things on the deadline. That expectation can't carry over if you needed more time. Now, it's not punitive. You're not getting points taken off. But if you want the best and brightest version of what I can offer you in terms of assisting you, then get the work in. At the same time, there are students who feel like, I don't really want her feedback. So I'm good. And I respect that. Look, you think you can handle it. Can't say I didn't offer it. Can't say it's not there. So for me, it's giving the students a reason that's meaningful to them. But also usually it takes that first assignment of them saying, like, I'm not playing around. Like, I'm not giving you good job. Like, I'm not giving you 2-sentence feedback. Like, I'm really going to go in because I want you to be the best. And I'm going to utilize the full weight of what I know and deploy it for your success. And once they see that, like, I am for you and not against you, like, I am here to help you win, then they are motivated to stay on it. I have suggested schedules, and then I have like one final deadline, again, dealing with adults. And so I understand that life has prayers and things that need to be shifted around, but also I have a life too. So let's work together. But the sort of currency of that is I am willing to go all out for you if you are willing to do the same. And that, for me, at the graduate level, I'm dealing with graduate students, I'm dealing with adults. That is a different, that sort of eliminates the procrastination. I don't get a whole lot of it because people want the feedback, they want to know. how to do better, how to be successful. And so that's kind of how it works for me.
Yeah, I mean, I do get some of it, right? Dealing with freshmen and an online environment, I feel like I probably get more than y'all do. But one of the questions that I ask them in their reflections sort of throughout the semester and for their sort of midterm big reflection and final grade big reflection is I ask them about, you know, meeting deadlines, whether they did that, whether if they weren't going to be able to do that, if they contacted me before, like I had asked them to, what they think their ability to turn things in, how that reflected on their progress this semester. And I make them think about it. And I don't think I've ever had anyone who is a consistent procrastinator who doesn't put that into their reflection and who has been like, yeah, I deserve an A, even though I didn't turn anything in on the deadline. I have students who say like, I could have gotten an A in this class and I just have time management problems. So I'm going to give myself a C. And I'm like, okay, I agree with that assessment. So I let them put that into their own reflection of their work rather than it being something that I am imposing on them as a punishment for procrastinating.
Great, awesome. We are actually right at time. I want to thank all the panelists for their work here today. I know this work is not over. And I will make sure that the recording of this session gets posted along with those references, which are really good. Perhaps even, if it's okay, the entire PowerPoint, right? Like, and I also want to thank all the attendees, both now and in the future. Again, I think one of the things that we might take away from this is the diversity of approaches we might have to ungrading, that ungrading can mean a lot of different things. And that was the really excellent thing to me about having our three panelists, that they have this sort of core area that they work on, this philosophy about ungrading, but they do it in three different ways. And I think that's the takeaway for me today. We'll have some more programming for the system. Stay tuned for that. And anyways, if everyone would like to clap either virtually or in person for our panelists, I'd appreciate it. And y'all have a good afternoon.